Good morning and welcome to Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. For our talk this morning, it's tending to our fire breath. But first, we'd like to ask Tejo to do the opening sutra.
An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
Now, a brief statement on dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And Liliane, you would like your dana to go to
Great Tree.
If you want to donate to Great Tree, go to greattreetemple.org and follow the donate path. This morning's speaker is Dr. Liliane Myoren Papin. She is a Franco-American writer and teacher of Chinese medicine, which she describes as the ecological medicine, particularly suited to our times. She practices and teaches acupuncture, herbology, Qigong, and dietary therapy. Welcome, Liliane.
Thank you very much. So, good morning, everyone. Although for me, it's not morning, it's afternoon. And today you might hear at some points helicopters and some noises, because where I live today is you might have heard about that, is a 24 hours of Le Mans, a car race. And that's the only really important event in this city, but the whole city goes crazy. And there are thousands, millions of people. I don't know how many, especially this time, it's the 100th year of that car race. And so, there are helicopters, cameras, and they're racing for 24 hours nonstop. And I don't know, to me, there's something in our days where that seems so crazy and out of place. I don't know, maybe it's me, and we're at the same time, we're told to please be careful about turning off your lights and everything. And here you have this huge event, 24 hours nonstop. Talk about fire, speed. And of course, I admire the people who can drive for 24 hours, but this insanity and all of these helicopters, I mean, the money and the resources that go into that. So that's my little peeve for the day. And I think it's a good illustration of the topic today, of fire. And let me preface that by saying, in yoga, we talk about fire breath, This is not what I'm talking about. It's mostly that we do have a fire breath, and I'm going to explain that from the perspective of Chinese medicine or Taoist medicine, because it's very, very old. And I think you can find in that approach the roots, the shamanic roots that precede Chinese medicine as we know it. So fire, basically, it corresponds to this season. So that's the energy, and we're going to talk about that energy, even though even that word is can be a little bit misleading, but so it's an energy that we find in the season today, of course, summer, although here too, according to the lunar calendar, summer began May 5th and this year and should end July 20th. Okay. Anyway, it corresponds to the season of summer. The color is red. It corresponds to, of course, fire and heat. There's a taste associated to the season, which is the bitter taste, the taste of things that are burned or roasted. For example, coffee, right, is a good example of a bitter food. But if you're already thinking, oh, good, chocolate is great for the summer, sorry, no. I'm saying that because when I with my students, you know, we have a 2-year program, and I'm amazed at the obsession with chocolate. I can bet now when they raise their hand about something, I say, okay, who is asking about chocolate? And it never fails. So especially when we talk about bitter taste and things for the heart and love and so on. So the organs that correspond to that energy are the heart and the small intestine. Very interesting. It's like, I don't know how much I'm going to have time to go into details today, but let's say that if we think about the heart, you know, the way we think about heart and love in our culture, you know, especially romantic love and I love you with all my heart and so on, to think that in that model, the small intestine is part of the heart, I think is rather sobering and not very romantic, meaning if you want to have a good heart and if you want to love, you'd better make sure your small intestine is working fine. So just like the lung includes the large intestine, so it's almost like, you know, those play cards where you have, we could say we have a chest with the lung and the heart, and then we have the abdomen, the reverse, but the same, with large intestine and small intestine. And in that model, they're not different. They're absolutely not different. They're part of the same model. So when we know that, first of all, let's say that if you wonder, like I did when I first learned about that, why, you know, why associate the small intestine to the heart? Is it just, you know, superstition, or what does it mean? And we know now through science today that the small intestine, which has in Chinese medicine the function of separating the pure from the impure. Well, we know with our modern tools that indeed at the level of the small intestine is where there's a first kind of composting and sorting out, and where in particular the minerals that make the blood red, meaning iron and B12, that is where they are integrated into the body. So this old model of Chinese medicine was already aware that the color red that we associate to the blood, that is associated to the blood and to the heart, is indeed begins in the small intestine. So you have lots of cases of anemia that begin because of a problem in the digestive tract. So it's good to start with that, because what I think where it helps us is that when we talk about emotions, when we talk about especially fiery emotions and the fire of summer where everything is so exuberant, there's kind of a reminder in that model that we need to be very centered. And if our digestive system is not working right, if our small intestine is not working right, our heart is not working right. And it is particularly important with Chinese medicine, because the heart means much more than what we mean by heart. It is not just the organ. First of all, like I said, it includes the small intestine, and it has many functions, and you can diagnose the heart through many ways. So let me give you a few. For example, we say that the heart manifests in the complexion, meaning it's the most visible energy. Fire is the most subtle, the most exterior, summer fire. So we see it in the complexion. It says also we can see the heart spirit, which is called the shen in Chinese medicine. And the shen can be seen in the eyes. So it is not so much whether the eyes are red or, like with liver energy, we saw that. It's not that, it's more the gaze, the clarity of the gaze. So, and we know if you have talked to people with Alzheimer's, right? We know that there's an emptiness in the eyes. On the other hand, if we talk to somebody who is high on drugs, there's a fixity, in the gaze. That is heart energy. So all of those are actually used in Chinese medicine as tools of diagnosis. Another thing is that we say, in particular in the practice of Qigong, is the heart opens into the hands, meaning the heart manifests its energy into the hand. And of course, the hands is what we do, how we do it, whether we caress or whether we slap. It has softness or it has hardness. And before we even go any further, because I know I'm not going to be able to say everything, a good practice in Qigong, actually, to work on our heart, to work with our hands and wrists in particular, the flexibility of the wrist. We hold a lot of tension in our wrists. And I know in Dogen's book on kitchen, there's a passage where Dogen says that sometimes, I can't remember the exact words, but sometimes he cries, he gets tense when he hears the pans cry out in pain, through the noise. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because that is indeed the practice of the hand and the practice of the wrists. So we have many points, many acupuncture points on the wrists. The lung, here is a heart point. There's another heart point. And those 2 points are actually called ghost points, meaning that they reflect our attachment to materiality. It's called spiritual phlegm, spiritual mucus. So I'm saying that because if I don't have time, to go and say, which will be the case, everything I'd like, so that you have a tool already, which is, and we do it spontaneously when we're agitated, we do that. So working on our wrists, and of course I'm thinking of working with consciousness, and when we do something, the softness, so that it doesn't make noise. Of course, tea ceremony, flower arrangement are all based on that flexibility and that softness in the hands and in the wrists. So here too, what is important in that is when we say heart, in Chinese medicine, it also means the mind. And that's a little bit confusing at the beginning, because this model attributes to the heart many things that we attribute to the brain. And so consciousness is one of them, in the sense that, fire, when we say fire energy, we also say light. There's no light without fire. Okay, sunlight gives us, at least in our dimension, so that the ability, it's a bit like, the sorting out at the level of the small intestine, that's sorting out in terms of consciousness of what is impure and what is pure, what is part of the light and what is not, is a function of the heart. So mental agitation, for example, when our mind goes 100 miles an hour or more, that's, in the Chinese model, that is a disorder of the heart. There's no difference between the mind, the organ, the system. The fire energy is out of order. And then, of course, there's a crescendo. If it's once in a while, it's okay. And then it's like the fire gets more and more out of order. And then we have chronic diseases that are fire disorders. So hypertension is a fire disorder. And very often the cause of hypertension is actually the burnout, literally, of water resources in our body, through speed, through overactivity, you name it. And of course, through food, through alcohol, all of those are fuel for fire, okay? So, but the diagnosis of fire energy out of order is that agitation in the mind, lack of concentration, meaning a very important aspect of heart energy, of a good heart energy, is the ability to concentrate. So we can say that practices like Zazen, developing awareness and consciousness, those are all trainings for the heart as well. And they calm the heart. So the spirit of the heart, again, is called Shen, the Shen. And Shen could be translated in a variety of ways. We say that the Shen resides in the heart. And in my classes, especially when I talk about emotions, I like to call it a dragon, the red dragon of our heart. And we talked a little bit of the green dragon of the liver. And you could say that those two dragons, the green dragon, the red dragon, liver and heart energy, they're the ones that are the most, maybe the most difficult. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but let's say that they really need to be tended to. Why? Because they can be dangerous. So if you think of fire energy, right? And that's where that can be a nice guide for us, that little model, simple model, is that if we want to work with our heart, if we want to work with our consciousness, if we want to be more concentrated, if we want to have to help with hypertension, we can use the image of fire as a guide, because everything, and I know right now where you are, I've heard and read about that, about the fire in Canada and the smoke. And obviously it's an energy that gets out of balance very easily, and that needs to be contained. That's a characteristic of fire energy. It needs to be contained. If you look in our houses, when we want to make a fire, we have a fireplace. We don't make it in the middle of the living room, right? Or it's very dangerous if we do. And so we have a fireplace to contain, and we put a screen in front of the fire. I participated a few times in sweat lodges, right? And when you do a sweat lodge in the Indian tradition, there's always one person whose role is the fire keeper, right? The fire keeper, to make sure that it doesn't extinguish itself if there is rain or wind, but also that it does not, propagate, because that's one of the characteristics of fire. That it can easily get out of control. So both the green dragon and the red dragon, when we deal with that, when we deal with emotions that are related to the liver and summer energy, for example, in the summer, that's where there's a higher risk of riots in cities. Heat, makes you hot and high and irritable. So meaning that, and we have a lot of firearms, right? We see all the problems with that, and nuclear arms. We can definitely say that our civilization, our world today, its number one problem is a fire that is out of control, through firearms, through speed, through wanting to go faster, through wanting to go higher. And so that energy is not controlled anymore and burns everything. And when the fire is out of control, the air becomes, so the lung suffer, the kidneys suffer, because water cannot, evaporate, and there's no more water. So we burn literally all of our resources. And it's exactly the same in our bodies or in nature. So it is important to, I think, at least it's helpful to me. That's the gift I find in the body awareness and in the tools that Taoism gives us through Chinese medicine, which is to realize that the energies that are us, it's not only part of us, they are us. And the energies that are in the world are the same around us. They're one and the same. So the fire image is a good image to show us what is needed. So, for example, I was saying knowing oneself, because we need a perimeter, is that how you would say that? Perimeter of security, of safety, meaning that if our fire is out of control, it's a good idea to go away or to avoid certain situations, because we will hurt people or we will hurt animals. It's not, it's out of control and it's a damaging energy. So we need to know. So one meditation that is part of that Taoist tradition is to reflect and kind of test yourself in your mind or in certain situations, to put yourself in situations that tend to get your fire going, to get used to managing your fire. And that, a mental energy that says, oh, no problem, I will manage my anger, or I'll be careful. But if we don't have any practice in that, it's just like, thinking that we can think about Zazen and it's enough. We need to practice. So I heard recently, there's a man I like very much in France who is handicapped and severely handicapped, and he practices Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, but that's not really relevant. It's Buddhism. And he has little pearls. He gives little pearls because, of course, as a handicapped person, he's used to all kinds of reactions around him. And some of them, he says, really test him and, get him very fiery, because people have a tendency to think that because he's handicapped, he's crazy or cannot take care of himself or doesn't think right. So he said that he really had to learn in his environments to really find the way of when to use his fire, to make sure people understand that there are limits, but also to not explode every time he would like to, because it happens often. And he was giving the example on a plane where, he's a traveler, he's very well known, and he was meeting one of the best known Buddhist teachers in France. Anyway, so he's used to taking care of himself and he knows how to do that. And he was in the plane, and the stewardess, asked him she did not realize it, but with condescendence, did you make sure somebody is waiting for you? And he said he could have strangled her when she said that. But, he said, sometimes you wonder whether you need to educate people and let your fire come out, or whether, he said, in this case, I just smiled and let my fire, just be like a small fire. But he said that in order to do that, he practices in many situations. So, for example, he said that when he goes to a restaurant where there is a nice view, and that somehow struck me, he says that he will purposely not go to the place that has the best view, with the intention of letting other people enjoy it. He said, just so you get rid of the weight of that, that fire of want, desire, wanting this and not that. And that really struck me. So that's the first thing we need to know about ourselves, is how much our fire gets us into troubles. And of course, the cold is not better. Indifference, being afraid of speaking up. We say actually the heart manifests into speech, meaning right speech is a function of the heart. So, but again, it's the words we use, but also the speed of our speech. Stuttering, for example, is seen in Chinese medicine as a heart imbalance. So that means too, we can practice with our speech to regulate the fire of our heart. Poetry, singing are great ways of working with the fire of the heart. But of course, we can also, it's a fire, so we can hurt people very badly with speech and with words. Just by the same token, you know, our gaze, we know very much when people give us a dirty look, right? We can decipher the aggression in the eyes. So it's the same thing, practicing, like for example in Tai Chi or in Qigong, at a higher level of practice, we practice, or people are invited to practice with the gaze and the soft gaze, and of course also with cloudy hands. All of that is to soften the heart and therefore the mind. So the important conclusion, at least for me, I think that's a very important one, is that when we talk about mental disease, in the Chinese model, we talk about heart disease. It's not different from a cardiovascular disease. It's a different manifestation according to emotions, according to our history, but it is a heart disease, a mental disease, whether be it schizophrenia, bipolar, you name it, it's a heart disease. So the good news about that is that it's the same, the way we need to take care of our heart on a physical level is the same. So of course that image of the fire can be a guide, and to tend to our fire through our activity, our speech, our gaze, our wrist, we can practice all the time with that heart energy, which has an effect on the mind. And of course, I think you're all very aware of that, since you practiced Zazen and you are, you know, we're doing this through Great Tree with Tejo here. However, these are really helpful, you know, like, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh says, when you wash the dishes, you know, do it as if you were washing a baby. And it's the same. It's the idea that, you know, our hand, wrists, the way we express ourselves, everything is part of that heart energy. So another thing that is a bit of a mystery in that model is that, you know, certain emotions are associated, at least at the beginning, it's a mystery. Afterwards, I think it becomes clear. But I was a little bit puzzled and did not get really good answers to that, to the fact that in the 5 energies, you have certain emotions that are linked and virtues that are linked to each or system. So for the green dragon, for example, we saw that it was anger, liver energy, right? We saw that for the earth energy, it's, worrying, the round and round thinking, obsessive thinking, and the mind that goes around and around. That's worry, is the emotion that's associated with earth energy. Sadness with lung energy. And we saw that with sadness and lung in the fall. And then with the heart, it is joy. So it's interesting because the other ones, you think, oh, they're negative energy, emotions, but joy, it's a positive. I mean, that's what we think, joy is positive emotion. So how come it's on the same level, And so very often in our modern world, we circumvent the difficulty by translating by hyperactivity, which is a heart disease, hyperactivity or excitement. But the word in Chinese is actually joy. So I did the same, translating it differently for a while. And then I thought, well, I'd better look at that. And then what it made me realize that none of those emotions are actually negative or positive. They are pure energy. And they have the same energy as the movement. So, for example, tree energy, liver energy is upward. Well, anger is upward energy. It goes up. So, and sometimes anger has the gift of authenticity, of cutting through hypocrisy. And, sometimes it can let us say things that are important. And of course, it needs to be contained, just like the fire. It needs to be contained because it can be dangerous. And the more, the wiser and the more skilled we become, ideally, we don't need the explosion of anger to be able to take the steps that anger can enable us to take sometimes. But that's an upward energy, and it can go either way. We can say Martin Luther King, Gandhi, or the Dalai Lama together today with the Chinese, his position on China. Those people have managed to harness anger and turn it into an upward energy toward change, right? So, for example, worry. Yeah, it's worry when you turn around can be negative, but to worry about the well-being of somebody, to make sure they're okay, and if they're not doing so well, to make sure they have everything they need, that's also positive. So I realized those energies are neither positive nor negative. They're just an energy. And in that sense, joy is the same way. It's an energy that is like fire. It's very explosive, and it's a dispersed energy. And so joy can easily distract you, and it's a fire. So one of the things about fire energy, when it's left to its own, it's propagates, it's not concentrated, it tends to radiate, and it's positive energy and it's negative energy. It's both. And so joy, as we know, tends to how to say, I'm thinking of the French word, déborder, to like a river that overflows. And like, look at, for example, joyful events, whether it's the 4th of July celebration, or whether it's a soccer event. they very often end up in violence. You know, people drink alcohol, and when we celebrate a joyful event, very often we do drink, we do eat foods that we know we would be better off not eating. It's usually an excuse that we use to gently destroy ourselves, right? And the body doesn't care, you know, and certainly joy is better and it will help digestion to a certain extent. But, you know, whether you do it joyfully or not, if you drink a bottle of champagne, you're going to be drunk and you're going to suffer, right? And so joy has that fire energy that is difficult to harness. And when we let it take over, you know, it's a high. Any joyful event is a high. And as we all know, and one of the rules of life is any high is followed by a down. And the higher we are, the more steep the fall. So it's not wrong. It's not a wrong energy, but like fire, it needs to be harnessed. And we need to know about its nature because it can take us along. You know, it can burn us, just like we see, you know, every gathering, joyful gathering, you know, we need police, we need firemen who are present and, you know, who are ready to interfere because there is that tendency. 14th of July in France every year, burning of cars. It's become almost a ritual. So, but by the same token, we have the figure of the laughing Buddha. Joy is not wrong, but what it indicates to us, I think, is that if we count on external events to give us joy, we always want, it's not going to be enough because that event is going to stop and there's going to be the down. Getting drunk is a high, it's followed by a hangover, right? And we all know when we participate in a joyful event, well, the next day there's a little bit of nostalgia, you know, after it's like the book, one of the book, what is the name of this author? Alan, I can't remember his name, but you know, after the ecstasy, the laundry. So that's true of joy. And so when joy gives light, okay, so what it indicates, and the laughing Buddha indicates, is that joy needs to come from inside. It's not the joy that is linked to external event. That joy often tends, I should not say always, but often tends to be unstable. And we want to get the high again. So that's what we do. That's why, you know, you look at a calendar, at a year-long calendar, and especially in France, maybe even more so than in the States, but it's one celebration after the other. And of course, every time, well, the same ritual, cakes and sugar and birthdays, and every occasion is a celebration and a joy, but really it becomes very subtle way. It becomes a pretext to search for those highs. And that reminds me of a little story too of Yogananda that stayed with me because it spoke to me very much. Yogananda is an Indian guru, right, who came to the West, and he didn't know coffee when he first came to the West. And the first time he was in the West, he his students brought him coffee in the morning, a cup of coffee, and he discovered that he liked it very much and that coffee was nice. So, and they brought it to him the next day and the day after. And he said that he realized after a few days of that, 5-6 days of that, he found himself awaiting the coffee and looking forward to the coffee. So he said, okay, coffee, my friend, you got me. No more. And he stopped it right there and then, because he said he realized that the small pleasure, that he was becoming a prisoner of that small pleasure. So I'm not at the level of Yogananda. If it struck me, it's because there are many times when I want to develop, let's say that I work in that direction. I've let go of many addictions over the time because there's that prison of wanting that high, that joy, that fire, right? But really what those teachings tell us is that the fire is inside. Our heart is a fire. When we create love, when we give love, when we experience compassion, that's a fire. And that's a fire that's not dependent on any external factor. And of course, love, I'm not going to go too much into that, but as we know, there's a lot of confusion around the word love. What does it mean? It's a fire, all right. And the red symbol of love. And there's a lot of confusion around that. I love you. I don't love you anymore. I love chocolate. I love lasagna. I love, I like you, but I don't love you. It's a very, very confusing word. And it shows the confusion in our minds, in our hearts about that. And again, in the Chinese model, the heart and the mind are the same. So if there is confusion in our mind, there's confusion in our heart. So let me just finish this talk by just a couple of things on fire energy and maybe what to do. At least a few things to do is, of course, in the summer in particular, to remember that we are more fiery. So things that create fire in winter will have more effect in the summer. So coffee, alcohol, all of that have more, have more effect in the summer on our mind and heart. Meaning mint, keeping cool is a good idea, but that means also through our food. So of course, no bloody food, because blood is hot, blood is fire. Green food, green is cool. Mint is a great ally in the winter, in the summer. Cucumber, watermelon, nature shows us how to balance that fire energy. So here too, we need some awareness about the fire. And if we want to be healthy, if we want to have a peaceful mind, a quiet mind, if we want to have more concentration, we need not to pour fuel on the fire and tend to the breath, to the fire of our breath. And I mean breath in the sense of chi, the fire of our energy, because life is a fire. So we need to learn how to tend to the fire of our life, to the fire of our heart. And all of that is one and the same. So the good news, in that, it's not at all a pessimistic view, it's actually very encouraging that taking care of our body, taking care of our heart, is taking care of our mind. We cannot expect to have a healthy mind if we constantly pour fuel on our, and so, all those things I always talk about. Sugar is a fire. And so, what that tells us, of course, is the wisdom that there was in ancient people. And sometimes, often, we don't understand why they were doing things, so the tradition of food in monasteries in old days, was to tend to that fire, knowing very well that when we eat food that are fiery or unhealthy, if we eat too much, we're not going to have a peaceful zazen. Either we're going to fall asleep. So it was so many tools. Same thing, the practice of martial arts, or the practice of Qigong, the practice of yoga, were all meant to tend to that fire of life and to bring a balance. When the big issue we have, and I'm right there with everybody, of course, is we tend to separate them, nature and me. The fires that are burning, they're us. They reflect us. They reflect our way of life. So that's the tending to our fire breath. This is what I wanted to share of that, Taoist wisdom that I think is so helpful today and has so many gifts for the problems and challenges of our modern world, because our fire energy is out of control. Okay, so I will stop here. Not much time, but if there are quick questions or quick comments, I'll be happy to give you time and room for a little while. I hope I did not extinguish your fires. Enthusiasm is a quality of the heart.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wonder, when you talked of the heart mind, in Zen, I guess sometimes you mentioned the hara, or I guess in Taoism maybe Dantian.
Yes.
Comment on that, how that's linked maybe to this heart mind you have been describing.
Well, again, today was a very short, but think of intestines, small intestine, large intestine. They are part of the heart. And so it goes with modern science that says, the intestines is our second brain. So, but it's not separate from the heart. The heart includes the small intestine. The lung includes the large intestine. So that's the hara. So they're not separate.
Thank you. I was never aware of that.
Yeah. So, basically meaning if we are constipated, for example, well, our heart mind is disturbed. And that's what I think is such a precious teaching for our days, to stop separating body, mind, emotions. It's a very fluid continuum.
So when we're breathing into our belly, what effect does that have?
Well, it has effect of, we see it's fire energy we were talking about. So meaning that everything that's tending to our fire, everything that's going to ground the fire, because it tends to be upward and external. So one way it's, creating a fireplace in a way in our belly. by getting the breath. So it's calming, giving it a place to rest and a solid earth place to be. And so, yes, it's calming the mind, and it's also anchoring the mind into the, I sometimes say that, you know, the red dragon has a first floor and a ground floor, or a basement. And sometimes, you know, we tend to overlook the basement or think it's not cool, but really, if the basement is not solid, nothing else can be. So it's tending to our basement, the fire in the basement, and making sure it's, you know, alive and well. You know, it's the flame of the adrenals, for example, that needs to be active. There's a metabolism that needs to be active in the intestine. And it's also an anchoring of that fire energy, the fireplace for it.
Thank you. Any other questions? You can raise your hands if you know how to do that. It's under reactions.
Tom, Tom says, I was new to French. Now you're teaching me about Chinese medicine. Oh, hi, Tom. Great. So, you know, this summer, I just maybe finish with that is let that image of fire speak to you, speak to me. That's what I do for myself, that red dragon, and tending to fire, you know. And of course, right now, there's a really good opportunity with the forest fires to see what we do and what happens in the world today, and all the different roles of fire, because it's not negative either. It's positive enthusiasm. It's, you know, purification. But yeah, too much fire. We can see what it does in many, many ways. And we need to tend to our own fire inside of us, because it's the same process.
Do you have something to say, Susan?
Well, it's not exactly a question. It's just a noticing how important the hands are. That when the mind is obsessive, for example, cooking with the hands can be so grounding. At times when it's hard to turn the mind off at night, just moving energy into the hands can be an indication, like, oh, okay, I feel a little burning in my hands. This is good. You know, the energy is moving from that overactive heart mind into the gentleness of the hand.
Absolutely, yes. And in Qigong, actually, the Qigong for the heart has a lot of work on the wrists and the hand. Yeah, for that reason. And by the same token, you know, I know for myself, I can judge my own heart mind through my cooking. Have you ever noticed when you are preoccupied how you burn everything? It happened to me a couple of months ago. I invited one of my sisters, and thank God it was just my sister, but I was in the midst of some very worrisome things that I let take over. And my whole meal was burned. Every single thing was burned. And I thought, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And Tejo, you must have noticed that I was doing something with my hands that I didn't even know I was doing.
Yeah, I noticed that. I thought you were raising your hand or something. so our time is up, so I think we better wind this up. Thank you so much. Wait a minute, somebody just said something.
French cooking burn is still better than most styles. Oh, that's I don't know about that, but okay. Well, thank you to you all, and
Let's
enjoy summer fire. Tend to your fire.
let's get back to merit. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to connect with you over there in France, across the ocean.
Thank you very much. It's nice to connect with you too.
And thanks everyone for coming.